Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bad Luck Gamer, and we have finally finished our Lancer the RPG game, which has been a lot of fun. It was a very good palate cleanser for a lot of things, and I'll kind of go more into my takes after we played Lancer for over 50 hours here on the channel. If you actually want to see some of the clips or some of the actual live plays, you can actually check them out on the channel. It's under the Lancer the RPG Wands WOND VODs. I probably should make a playlist for that. I'll make a playlist for that now that we're done and set and done with it. But we got to play for a good chunk of time. 50 hours is not a small amount of time by any means when it comes to tabletop. And so I feel like we got a much better look at it than our initial first impressions video. So this time I did another interview with the players that I played with this time around, and I'll also give my impressions after you all see how those interviews went with them. All right, so we've done a full campaign of Lancer. How are you feeling after we're done?
Feeling pretty good. It's a lot of fun.
How'd you like Lancer?
It's definitely very fun. I'm used to a lot of games that are more RP heavy, so it's been an adjustment going to something that's mostly combat. But it's not bad. It's definitely a fun one.
It's fair. How'd you like Lancer, like, overall, as, like, a game?
I would say it's a good 7 out of 10 for me.
Okay. Uh, what was it that you liked about Lancer?
I think the setting is mostly what gets me, just a futuristic world in space. And not gonna lie, the random tables also made it a lot more fun for the amount of shenanigans that could happen.
It's true, they do have some good random tables.
I think that's mostly it. I do like the combat and I love the customizability of the mechs, but that's just only a fraction of like the combat portion of it.
Okay. Was there anything about the system you didn't like?
Unfortunately, that would go back to me being mostly into RP stuff, and that's just because this system is designed more for tabletop combats versus roleplay moments. But that's just my personal preference. It's nothing against the system itself.
That's fair. So, what kind of tabletop player would you say you are, and how much does Lancer kind of fit into that for you?
I would say I'm about 50-50 when it comes to combat and roleplay. I feel like I enjoy it more when it's in equal amounts. So this does scratch the itch for a good combat session as far as that goes. But that's pretty much what it fills in for me.
Okay, just the combat, and that's about it.
About it, yeah.
If someone was going to play Lancer for the first time, what tips or advice would you give to them?
Take some time and read up on your mech because there is a lot of things that go into the mechs.
That's fair. Anything else you'd like to leave off with?
No, other than if anyone's interested, go ahead and give it a try. It is a fun game especially if you're into tabletop warfare.
Okay, excellent. All right, thank you. So, how we just got done with Lancer? How you feeling?
Love this game. Fucking slaps.
How'd you like it?
Adored it is the better word. I absolutely love Lancer to death. I think it is one of my favorite like tabletop games of all time. Like I put this in the same little slot as like Pathfinder and like Vampire. I think they're just like games that I just had an absurd amount of fun playing. Not much dull moments for me in this like system.
Okay, so like as a game, how much did you like Lancer?
Oh, I think it's a fantastic game. It's a cross between like a war game and a tabletop game. Granted, the actual like tabletop roleplay aspects, I mean, rule wise, is really bare bones. So you get what you put in, but the actual like war game combat aspect of it fucking rules.
So if you were to give it a 1 to 10, what would you rate it at?
10.
10.
This probably
Okay.
has some of the most engaging and fun combat of a tabletop game we played. Because like I like Pathfinder just fine, but like I think Lancer's combat's more fun just because of my predilection for war games.
That's fair. So, what about Lancer did you really like?
I think Lancer lends itself a lot to a lot of weird tactical engagements. Like the multiple fights we've had, the three like main memorable ones that we've done, like the big siege on the military base, the one we had in like that one like ship, the pirate ship, and then the other one of like this. Always had little strange moments that occur through like just the rules interacting that force people to like tactically play around it. I think like the end part where we had multiple shields being popped up, and then the effects of people playing around the shield, and like eventually having it to a point of like, oh, they're just kind of stuck in there, can't do anything. Like, it's just the interaction of rules in Lancer feels really interesting because players or enemies will use abilities that shape how the combat's going to go, and everyone has to play around it in a really interesting way. Despite how there's some very strange rule interactions because not everything's been fully thought out. I think that's one of the strengths. That there's so many abilities that all interact in very strange and dynamic ways.
Okay.
So like no combat feels the same. At least if you have a DM who's making a actual engagement with a map that is not just a big white cube.
True. Okay, was there anything about the game, if any, that you disliked?
I mean, the only part that I dislike is like, I mean, on one hand, I do wish that the actual like out of mech stuff was more prominent, because I would like this game to have elements where I could say like Titanfall it, maybe have a mech piloted like remotely through NHP stuff, and I can run around and be useful rather than like what seems like the situation is you can be slightly useful and then get one tapped by a mech with just shooting you. There doesn't seem much point in doing that kind of dynamic play. Like, there's a talent for it, but I don't know why you take the talent. That's the only complaint. But on the other hand, it's like, you know, it's not what they're going for. The mechs is like the point. So maybe like building a bunch of rules for the pilot part might take that away. But I don't know, if they just made a book that allowed me to play Titanfall 2 in Lancer, I'd be pretty down for it.
That's fair. So, what kind of tabletop player do you see yourself as, and how does Lancer play into that?
I'm a big narrative player, but this is my outlier because I also am a 40K player, and this appeals to that part of my brain.
Okay. If someone was going to play Lancer for the first time, what tips would you give them?
Use CompCon. If you're not using CompCon, you're throwing, and I don't know what you're doing. Yeah, that's honestly really it. CompCon is the best beginner thing ever because it has all the rules you actually need. You can easily make characters in a really streamlined way. So yeah, just use CompCon.
Okay, that's fair. All right, anything else you want to leave off with before we get done?
Horus and North Star, best companies. Smith Shimano, kind of cringe. Rayleigh, best mech.
Rayleigh, best mech. Though you did like your world killer Genghis.
It felt really fun. I love the Rayleigh because you feel like a pistolero, which is really hard for some games.
Mm-hmm.
Like Pathfinder, my man, please. I just want to be a gun-toting pistolero. It doesn't feel the same with a weird flintlock. But it actually feels like I had 4 hand cannons and we're like moving around the map, just going bam, 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 like spinning around. It felt awesome. But then the Genghis, heat and like burn is so fun. It's such a fun damage type because I'm all for dealing non-normal damage types, like damage over time or like a build-up that just explodes. That's my shit.
That's fair. All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So we just got done with Lancer. How'd you enjoy it?
I liked it. It was really awesome. Like, this is my first time not doing anything with like the traditional stuff, and this is my first like sci-fi one, which was pretty awesome.
That's cool. So how'd you like Lancer itself?
I liked it. All the mechs were so cool. I think honestly the hardest decision might have been choosing the mech I wanted.
That's fair.
Yeah, all of them are just badass. Like, everybody in the groups were really cool. Like, Sefko running around super fast. uh booters just exploding. Like every single mech was really unique, which made it really cool.
That's right. So as a game, how do you like Lancer?
I like some things about it, but the only thing I didn't like about it was it's not as structured as the other games. Like the rules were kind of vague, and I like some structure, but it was a little bit iffy at times for me personally.
Okay, on a 1 to 10 scale, where would you rate it?
I would rate it like 7.5, 8 out of 10.
7.5, 8 out of 10. Okay, pretty good, pretty good. So what were some things about Lancer that you liked specifically?
I love our pastime. That was really funny. The secrets and
The downtime
mechs.
stuff, yeah.
Yeah. And then being badasses and kicking ass.
That's fair. So you already kind of went into it, but like, how exactly were things kind of vague that you didn't like about the system?
Like kind of how you said during this episode where you said it was like polling, but it wasn't really specific in what direction, how many spaces. Like it was just really vague. You didn't know what to do in that situation, which I didn't blame you for because that's a little bit vague. Or
So you think some of the rules could have just been a little bit more exact?
yeah,
And was there anything else you didn't really like about the game?
not really. But Foundry was a little bit weird to get used to from going from Roll20 to Foundry itself. That was fun.
That's fair. That's fair. So, what kind of tabletop player do you see yourself as, and how does Lancer kind of play into that?
That's a good question. I really do like fighting, but I also I like it to be balanced ideally. Like I like both role playing and fighting, but I do really love fighting, and this is kind of a war game more than anything. So that was kind of fun and different, but I wouldn't go back to it every single time. I think my ultimate favorite's Pathfinder.
That's fair. That's fair. So if someone was gonna play Lancer for the first time, what tips or advice would you give to them?
I would just say if they're afraid to ask questions to the DM, just ask them because the rules can be weird, and just to make sure to clarify on things because some people get a little shy to ask questions. And then don't be too indecisive about getting the mech. Like, just follow your heart. Kind of sounds cheesy, but
Hey, it's I think that's perfect. It's a really good game to just kind of really dive into something you like about a mech and just go all out.
yeah.
Okay. Any final words you want to give on Lancer before we're done here?
I'm good. Thank you.
So, finally done with Lancer. How'd you like it?
It was a blast. I actually got to facilitate a lot of what I wanted to do as a character. But there is like the struggle of like, what if I could just put one more system in though?
So how'd you like Lancer?
It was a blast. Honestly, had a lot of fun with it. There's a lot of tactical stuff with it too, which is really cool. And then just a better understanding of like some of the actions and stuff, like just learning like different things and realizing, oh wait, I can actually use this in this way because that's how the rules kind of work.
So Lancer as a game though, how do you like Lancer?
I think it's fun. I do see there's kind of a loss in like the RP aspect, but at the same time you kind of gain the zaniness of like the random tables, which can also tell a story as well. Overall, I like it.
That's fair. So on a scale of like 1 to 10, where do you rate it?
I'd probably put it as a 7 for me, for sure.
7. Okay.
Definitely would play again, for sure.
So what about Lancer specifically did you like?
The builds are a really huge part of it, honestly. I went down like a rabbit hole and built like a whole bunch of mechs and everything. Just the building in the system is really cool, but also just kind of seeing how like everybody's builds kind of function in the end, and you all kind of adapt as you're like leveling up your mechs to like So what can I do to like help out my allies more with stuff?
Mm-hmm.
I like it. There's definitely a teamwork aspect to it, 100%.
Mm-hmm. What, if anything, did you dislike about Lancer?
I guess lack of the more in-depth RP, I suppose. It's just the kind of lack of it. Don't get me wrong, like the random tables are like a lot of fun. I mean, we went on a whole thing about like the Harrison Armory secrets and everything, which was great. But there is like a certain lack of like closeness, I suppose, in a way.
Hmm. And you said like depth. Like, can you give an example of like how it lacks any depth in its roleplay?
I guess it's just like because like money isn't really an issue. Like, there's no reason to like talk to like different like shopkeepers and like shop around and stuff. You kind of just get the thing.
Mhm.
So and it's kind of just a lot about like what you roll on the tables and how your story unfolds. I guess there's a less of a personal touch. Yes, that's what I'm getting at.
Mm-mm. Okay. So what kind of tabletop player do you see yourself as, and how does Lancer fit in with that?
I'm very much a character builder and kind of like trying to work with the team as much as possible. And I do think Lancer very much facilitates that a lot. And looking at other mechs, it also facilitates a play style that I've been like really itching to do, which is the person who lays down traps everywhere
Hmm.
and kind of like moves around in a fight. So I might go that route, but I might go the fucking Atlas, and it's just like, ugh. I'm in that situation where there's like so many cool builds I want to do.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. That's fair. All right. So if someone was getting into Lancer for the first time, what tips or advice would you give them?
I would say very much like read your abilities all the way through. Don't kind of like go, okay, so this is what that does, and toss it to the side because you might miss a very important verbiage in like a lot of stuff. Where something I thought was really good was actually not as good as it normally is, and something that I would consider bad is actually really good when you read through the whole thing.
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to leave off with before we finish here today?
Not particularly. I'm excited to get back into the Pathfinder game, so that should be cool.
Okay, that's fair. All right. Thanks so much.
No worries.
Finally, we're done with Lancer. How'd you like it?
It was good. Real fun time. I like the vibe of, space mechs and all that. A good change of pace.
That's fair. How'd you like Lancer?
I think it's fun. It's a lot to keep track of when you're starting, but like it doesn't seem that hard to get a good enough grasp on to, do it well enough.
Mm-hmm. So is Lancer a game? How do you like Lancer?
Yeah. Fun. I like it.
You
It's
like it?
Yeah. I like it all around. I think it's got what you need. If you're looking for this kind of genre of stuff, this does it. It's good.
So what does it do?
It gives that like kind of crunchy feel without being like super crunchy. Like there's a lot of stuff, but it's not that hard to keep track of, and honestly, it's like I feel like it's not that big of a deal like you're worried about messing up every time you have an action to do. It's very open-ended and there's not like an ideal thing to do. And it gives you a nice sense of power in the world, which is fun. I really like mixing and matching mechs and all that. Almost like multi-classing, but cooler.
Okay. So if you were to rate it on like a 1 to 10, where would you rate it?
I think I would give it a solid like 7 or 8.
7 or 8?
Yeah.
Okay. So what about Lancer specifically did you like?
I mean, gotta love the downtime for sure. That was good.
Yeah.
I liked I liked a lot of just the cool abilities that mechs had. I liked a lot of my mech stuff, and then everyone else had really cool stuff that they could do too. And a lot of the mechs we never even touched were awesome. Just felt like most mechs had something cool that they did. If you put them together, could be even cooler.
Okay. Okay. Was there anything that you disliked about the system?
I don't know. I feel like it would be anything. Maybe just like combat was like real like slow, but that's just sort of I think mainly a lot of people and a lot of like not fully knowing everything about it. It wasn't like too bad either, but it was just very like I don't know. It was like drawn out a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, like
Not
any
the-
system,
Yeah.
you know, mastery of the system will improve the speeds of things like combat or anything. But was there
Yeah.
anything about like the game itself that you felt like you didn't like or could have been done better?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's just a lot of like if you just gotta get to know Lancer better and like you're fine, you're great.
Okay.
As long as you have the like knowledge of all the stuff.
Okay. That's fair. That's fair. So what kind of tabletop player do you see yourself as, and how does Lancer play into that?
I mean, I think for me, I like to do a lot of like weird stuff with mechanics and whatnot. And Lancer for sure let me do that with my boy the Lich. It was awesome. I feel like I had a good mix and match of like high damage and support and just completely unkillability and just a bunch of heat on people. It made me feel like I was doing fun stuff a lot.
Hmm. What kind of weird things were you doing?
Just blowing up all the time. I could not be killed because I could be killed. Just only temporarily.
Hmm.
And then like man, I had a lot of utility stuff that didn't really come up a lot, but when it did it was pretty helpful whenever I had the the opportunity to really put it into play.
So you enjoy the fact that, for instance, you could self-destruct and it wouldn't actually kill your mech.
Yeah, that was fun.
And then you like how some of the utility abilities were kind of a little bit more situational, but were really fun to use.
Yeah. I feel like they weren't like too situational where you're like, this is useless to have. And
Hmm.
like when it did come up, it was like significant.
Okay. So if someone was going to be playing Lancer for the first time, what advice or tips would you give them?
I think just like at least for me, I would suggest like for players like man, just like don't take like the initial choice of mech like too seriously. Just sort of pick one that seems interesting, and then you can figure out like how it is like in the process. Like I had no idea what I was gonna do with Lich. I was just like, this one sounds cool and it has like a fun ability, and so I went with it, and it turned out great. I was just having fun, and every time we leveled up, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but you could figure it out as you go, and it worked out, and it was fun to do. So there's like not really a need to get too hung up on like your like perfect decision making and whatever you're taking for character creation and whatnot.
Okay. And anything else you want to say or do before we finish here today?
Just Play Lancer. Good game. Try it out.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Woo! Dab.
All right. So, what are my takeaways from Lancer? Lancer was a really fun game, and honestly, if you're a casual mech enjoyer, not like the hardcore kind of number crunchy, kind of heavy kind mech games that are out there, I could think of a few, but I'm drawing a blank at the moment. This one's a lot more casual, but it is a very deep and strategic game. So if you like games that have a very strong strategic battlefield style gameplay, Lancer is probably just one of the bests on the market, even if it's not specifically mechs you're looking for. If you're looking for strategy, I mean, each mech frame that you have access to completely changes the way you play the game, which is very fun. In fact, it has some of the most dynamic archetypes, or, you know, whatever that you're looking for in your strategy game, and each character brings something to the match. Not only that, but the way the arenas could be set up, or even the enemy mechs or biological enemies that your group can go against can completely change the strategies needed to succeed in the event. So as a tabletop strategy battle game, it is top class, really, really good. I can't think of anything better. As a tabletop RPG, a narrative-based game, in a sense, I'm mixed. This game really comes it's not rules light, but it's not crunchy either when it comes to the actual tabletop narrative parts. It's somewhere firmly in the middle. Now, the rules for the narrative bits, the things that your pilots are actually doing, do feel more rules light, but at the same time, it's attached to a pretty deep narrative or tactical game. So I can't call this game rules light necessarily. And they've been doing a lot. They've been releasing a lot of books. The Long Rim is a really good way to set up a much more closed environment for your game. Something I struggled a lot with when we were running the game was that the scope of the universe was so vast. It was hard to make the players feel like they were doing anything specifically, because I didn't take the time to like set up a system or anything like that. Granted, the players didn't even do the initial job that we were setting out to do. Really, some were trying for sure. It was just not something that really came up. And as you saw from the prior interviews, a lot of the players felt like the narrative parts of the game just were so lacking, especially when you contrast it with the tactical battle elements of the game. So yeah, it felt wanting in some ways. And even compared to other rules like games, your pilot feels very bare bones and very basic, and not in a great way. Now, we had a lot of fun with the random tables that they present to you in the game, but despite that, it wasn't quite enough. Now, could we have done a better job? Could we have done a better job? Sure. I mean, I definitely have learned a lot from this particular campaign, and I learned a better way of doing it, and I've talked with some of my players after the fact. And I feel like if I did it again, I would make a much better narrative experience speaking. But the game doesn't lend itself to that necessarily. Now, they do have an adventure module or a AP, adventure path, however you want to call it, available for the game. I can't remember its name. I even bought it. I can't remember its name at this point in time, but it's actually really good. And I basically used some of the setting stuff for the players. I just didn't have a good mind for this kind of game when we started, and so I just kind of went a lot to waste. I do think that you can tell a really interesting narrative with this game, but the rules don't facilitate that. The players are more excited for the mechs than the pilots themselves. I feel like it's kind of a failing of a game if the character you're playing is not nearly as important as your equipment in this case, which are the mechs, because you can actually gain access to multiple mech frames, which can completely change your playstyle. And because so much was done with that end of the game, it left the pilot side to feel very bare bones and kind of basic. So it's up to you. If you want a really good game that's really easy to pick up and put down, Lancer is the game for you. It's really easy. You can even do sorties where you set your players to a certain license level and you say, hey guys, this weekend let's do a license level 3 sortie. Get your mechs out. We're gonna go do something fun. And I feel like that's a really fun way to play. Not only that, but Lancer is a really good game as a good palate cleanser. It allows you to still have that number crunch of board games that you might like, but it might not be as narratively weighty, which you might need if you're playing a very heavy campaign in the meantime. And you can do just a handful of missions, 1 or 2 missions, and then you're good because the game is kind of set up to be more like episodic in a sense. Like each particular mission is 1 to 2 sessions. You can burn a month or 2 just doing a handful of missions and then go back to whatever games you're doing and feel completely refreshed. In fact, a lot of my players were going back to Pathfinder after this, and they're stoked to get into Pathfinder. Not that they didn't have fun with Lancer, as you guys obviously saw, most of them giving it 7.5 style rating, but it was definitely not the long-term experience that I felt like they were craving for. And so that's going to be my overall opinion. And I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick pros and cons for Lancer. So the pros, you get to actively use mechs in a game that's very fun, not too crunchy. And not only that, but each of the mech frames offer a unique style of play and can change overall how you approach battle. The random tables are particularly good, and we had a lot of fun. They were very funny, and there's a lot of things we could do. It made downtime legitimately fun, and as kind of like a core component of this game, I think they did that part very well, even though it didn't lead to any necessarily deeper narratives. If you're not one for particularly heavy roleplay, or you don't like games that do too much between battles, this is a really good game to quickly go from narrative point to narrative point and get you back in your suit, get you back in your mech as quickly as possible to the next battle. So if you like battling more than narrative, this is probably the perfect RPG for you. The setting is very good, and I'm very excited to see what more Massive Press releases for Lancer. They're producing more and more as Lancer has been getting more and more interest, especially recently with all the OGL nonsense. And I mean, in the last year alone, I think they put out like a full-on like addition. They added the long rim content, and now they added their own like adventure path on top of it. It adds all kinds of cool narrative bits, and they were releasing mechs all the time. Plus, another bonus I'll put over here, they have a really great third-party system, and they love when people make new mechs or new kinds of components for their game. So if you like homebrewing things in, or you want to see the deep community that's formed around Lancer, it's really good. Now, for the cons, I'm going to put up here. So the biggest con for me is there's not a lot of depth to the pilot themselves. It's unfortunate, but your pilot really just doesn't mean a lot in the grander schemes. There's not a lot of things your pilot gets, even though the talents in the game are from your pilot and carry from mech to mech that you use. That can almost be a bad thing, because if you want to try a completely different playstyle, you might just have bad talents for it. So the pilot feels like they're holding the game back in some way or another. As of right now, there is not much in the way of like developed areas in the game. They talk about a lot of things. They talk about the broad scope of the game very well. That I would say that even a pro in this situation is the lore in the game is really interesting, and they've done a lot of good world building, but there hasn't been too much released in the way of like offering you a core hub to work around. And there's not a lot that actually links Lancers specifically together. Lancers are kind of just this thing that exists in the universe. The whole Lancer headquarters kind of deal that we did in our game isn't really present in the books, or at least not that I found. I could be wrong. Let me know in the comments below. The combat is very dense, and if you're not super into deep strategic combat, this might be a game you struggle with, either as a player or even as a GM, because this game really excels when everything is taken into consideration. But if you're not thinking about the height of certain terrain, or the kind of different terrain types that you could be using, or all kinds of stuff, there's just a lot of areas that can be tweaked for each specific battlefield. And thus, if you're kind of unprepared, or you're not someone who prepares much ahead of time, kind of like me, you might not have as good of battles as you might expect. I got lucky. They released an adventure path shortly before this campaign started, and I was able to use a lot of those battle maps for my own means. But, you know, there was only like 6, I think, in the entire book. So we were going to run out at some point soon if the game didn't end when it did. And it might have been something that I much more struggled with. Regardless, it's something to keep in mind that the combat is incredibly dense. So if you're not into particularly dense combat games, this might not be the game for you. Last but not least, I actually didn't put this in the pros section because we had some issues with it. But CompCon can be buggy. And it sucks because CompCon is a really good aid. And I recommend anyone who looks into Lancer use CompCon. You can actually get everything for free on CompCon, at least as far as players' needs, which is really handy. And it gives you the ability to look up all kinds of things. You get the various glossaries. You can look up mechs. You can build your characters online. It's a really good character builder. But it's buggy sometimes. Sometimes you can lose your information. Sometimes your information doesn't save. And that's tragic because it's such a good tool that the amount of bugginess really sucks. And I think on top of this point, I'm going to put as well, if you're looking for something like aid with Foundry or what have you, there is some stuff, but there's just not a lot of people working on Lancer content. So if you're looking for Lancer content, whether it's battle maps or all that kind of stuff out there, there's not a lot of places you can really look for that kind of stuff. Meaning it is overall a more difficult game to run because you kind of just got to do a lot more yourself. Now, despite the numbers of pros and cons, I'm going to give this rating for myself personally an 8 out of 10. It really excels in what it wanted to excel in. The mech combat is really good. The narrative can be as good as you want it to be, which I think is very great for tabletop to have. And because the narrative can be so light, you can get to the parts you want in the game much quicker, whether it's the combat or even the downtime, really, that you want to do for your characters. It's an absolutely wonderful game. I recommend everyone check it out, try it out, use CompCon to get access to the rules, and it's a really good game, and in my opinion, the best mech game out there currently for a player like me, who isn't necessarily that into super crunchy spreadsheet style of mech games, which there are a few out there of, and I'm sure people in the comments below will let me know of their personal favorite mech games, but Lancer, really good. Also, the art, chef's kiss, really, really good. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games, the bad luck to me, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.